Minister, good morning. Welcome.
How are you? How are you, Barry?
Very good. That letter from David Cameron, is that something the government asked for, or did it come out of the blue?
No, it's come out of the blue, I think, but it's obviously a pretty interesting observation from a Conservative leader. And of course, the British government not too long ago indicated that it's intending to cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by the middle of the next decade. So the UK government certainly doesn't have any questions about the climate science like Tony Abbott has, and also the UK government respects the advice of scientists and economists, unlike Tony Abbott, who goes around attacking both. So it's a pretty stark contrast, I think.
What do you make of the argument, though, that Australians are not impressed by the views of outsiders? They're only interested in what Australians have to think.
Oh, look, there's a lot of debate about all of these things, but at the end of the day, governments around the world are receiving advice from scientists that climate change is occurring and that we have to cut carbon pollution, and that's what David Cameron's being responsive to and his government's responsive to. Other governments around the world are responding to that advice as well, oftentimes by different approaches, but we're seeing an increasing incidence of emissions trading schemes around the world, and that's what the government's announced at the end of the day. The Korean government not long ago, just a few weeks ago, also indicated it'll be introducing an emissions trading scheme to cut carbon pollution in 2015, and the Californian government in the US is introducing an ETS from the 1st of January next year. The fact of the matter is that Tony Abbott is out of step with just about everyone around the world on this issue.
Do you accept, though, this sudden spike in inflation is the last thing that you need when you're about to introduce a policy that drives up prices?
Well, there's certainly pressure on household budgets, we understand that, but we've also got to keep the carbon price in perspective. The Treasury modelling, of course, shows that it's only a 0.7% increase in the consumer price index when the carbon price is introduced from the 1st of July next year, which is less than the June quarter CPI increase we've just experienced and that was announced this week. So I think we just have to keep things in perspective here, and of course bear in mind that 9 out of 10 households do receive some assistance under the carbon price package that the government announced, and in fact 6 million homes will have their expected cost impact met with tax cuts and increases in benefits, and 4 million households will receive about 120% of their expected price impact. So it's a significant assistance package and also a significant tax reform, with more than 1 million people no longer having to submit a tax return once these reforms are brought in.
Yeah, I wonder though, if with power prices, electricity prices in particular, go up next year, say 15%, and about 5% of that is due to the carbon price, you're going to have trouble persuading people that it's not all due to the carbon tax, and therefore they'll feel as if the compensation is not adequate.
Well, electricity prices have gone up on average around 40% over the last 3 years, and they're set to rise in the next few years by a significant amount too, and a carbon price is a part of that. But for the carbon price, of course, household assistance will be delivered. The fact of the matter is that electricity prices are increasing essentially because of the significant investments, billions of dollars worth of investments in the electricity distribution network. It's long overdue for that investment and needs the upgrading. I think people come to understand that the more that we're out explaining the carbon price package. I'm finding as I go around, we've obviously been travelling a lot in the last few weeks, that as we talk to people about the issues and explain why we're doing this, why it's necessary to cut pollution and drive investment in clean energy, and that the government's doing this at the same time as introducing household assistance and supporting jobs, people are becoming more comfortable with the policy position.
The opposition is asking the Auditor-General to look at your advertising. There are a couple of issues they raise. They claim that this suggestion that only 500 big polluters will have to pay. What about the 100,000 or so businesses who from 2014 will have to pay a tax on the transport fuel?
Well, this is just another piece of nonsense from Tony Abbott. I mean, really, he's taken the most unprincipled, opportunistic stance. He's been engaging in widespread deceit, and he's going to be increasingly found out for it. He said that, you know, the price impact on household prices for food and the like would be unimaginable. And in fact, food prices increase by, on average, less than 80 cents a week. And of course, there's household assistance to meet it. He's made all sorts of false, misleading claims about the impact on jobs, the coal industry being wiped out, the LNG industry being wiped out, whole towns wiped out, the steel industry wiped out. It's all ridiculous, it's all deceitful, it's all untruthful, and he'll be increasingly found out about it. This latest stunt's just another stunt, nothing more. You know, and on the LNG industry, just reflect upon the fact that this week a $14 billion investment commitment was confirmed by Origin Energy and ConocoPhillips for Gladstone. That's all in the full knowledge of the carbon price coming in. The fact is that the investment will continue to flow in our economy, in industries like LNG and coal. Jobs will continue to grow. The price impact is modest. Household assistance will be provided through tax cuts and pension increases, and there's a lot of support for jobs. But it's a good package we're putting forward, and it'll be good for the environment.
But is he wrong to say that it will apply to transport fuel after 2014 and that will affect 100,000 businesses?
Now, under the carbon price mechanism, there's only around 500 companies that will have to surrender permits for the pollution that they are emitting. We indicated, of course, that household vehicles, light commercial vehicles won't be affected by the carbon price mechanism, but in off-road usage, the government will make some adjustments to fuel tax credit arrangements.
Well, you've released the draft legislation. The Business Council is not happy. They say that you've locked in a 2050 emissions reduction target of 80%, and that's deeper than you previously said, and they say you did that without consultation.
Well, there's been plenty of consultation with the business community over recent months. That's an important target for 2050. It represents Australia's fair share internationally at reducing carbon pollution and tackling climate change. It's comparable to the commitments that other developed economies have been making and are continuing to make. And at the end of the day, we've got to go back to some basics with this, Barry. The scientific advice to governments around the world is that pollution is contributing to climate change. The empirical evidence is clear that warming is occurring. Governments have a public policy responsibility to respond to that advice. And when you do accept that responsibility, as the government does, you've got to go about doing it in the most cost-effective way for your economy and for businesses and households in your economy, and that's exactly what the government is doing. And there's no escaping those basics. What's Tony Abbott's alternative? He doesn't have one. He's got a joke of a policy. He runs around misleading the community, and he's going to be found out for it. He's been engaged in one of the most deceitful, unprincipled, opportunistic campaigns that I think I've seen in politics.
But again, it goes back to the killer issues of mandates and broken promises. In 2008, you promised to go to an election and seek a mandate before toughening the target beyond 60%. Now you've set it at 80%.
Well, look, the government has been clear, or the Labor Party, I should say, has been clear for years that it respects the scientific advice, that it wants to put in place mechanisms to reduce pollution accordingly. We went, as John Howard did, to an election in 2007, arguing for a policy to tackle climate change. We endeavoured on a number of occasions to get that through the Senate. It was defeated by a combination of the Greens and the Coalition. And of course, that was after Tony Abbott had taken the leadership over this issue from Malcolm Turnbull. We'd agreed on all these measures with Malcolm Turnbull. At that time, the government still got the policy position of tackling climate change, and we're determined to do so. The 2050 target is a fair response to our share internationally to reduce pollution and tackle climate change.
But why would you promise to go to 80% when you have no idea what the rest of the world will be doing 40 years from now?
Well, countries like the UK and all across Europe have made commitments over the period to 2050. Many countries are tackling this issue, is the truth of it. We are not on our own here. New Zealand has got an emissions trading scheme in place to try and reduce pollution in their economy. Many other countries are taking steps here. China reaffirmed over the last week or so that it will be introducing emissions trading schemes in 5 or 6 of its major provinces to cut pollution there. That's on top of them having the largest installed renewable energy capacity in the world and investing a fortune in renewable energy technologies and low emissions technologies. This is going on internationally. We want our economy to be well positioned. This is an important economic and environmental reform. This will drive innovation in our economy, create jobs in new areas, drive investment in clean energy, in renewable energy, And in the period ahead of us, leading up to 2050, our economy will have a lot of productivity delivered as a consequence of this reform.
Now, what about these carbon cops who apparently will be keeping an eye on these companies to make sure they're not cheating on their emissions? Tony Abbott said it's a police force chasing an odourless, weightless, tasteless, invisible substance, a draconian new police force that can put you in jail for 10 years.
Well, what a joke again. Here's Tony Abbott. Only a week or two ago, he was arguing against this position, saying, oh, it'd be terrible, you need a strong cop on the beat because there's going to be all sorts of monkey business go on, such as was experienced in Europe. Then we put the exposure draft legislation out with appropriate measures to deal with the potential for any irregularities or fraud in the system, and now he's carrying on as if it's draconian. In fact, the business community will be well familiar with these sorts of provisions for compliance and enforcement because they are features of our consumer and competition laws. They're powers available to the ACCC and to ASIC. They are in fact a number of the measures that are contained in the bills that are released this week are reflected already in our renewable energy target legislation. They're reflected in the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting legislation that Malcolm Turnbull under the Howard government brought in. This is just another piece of nonsense from Tony Abbott. The guy's got nothing to go on. He's a charlatan. He's running around trying to terrify people all the time, and he'll get found out for it. He'll have no credibility left. He's
right, though, when he says it's odourless and invisible, isn't it? What does a tonne of carbon dioxide look like?
Dear, oh dear. Well, I read a letter to the papers yesterday, one of the papers in Sydney, I think, that try sticking your head in a bag with carbon dioxide and it doesn't turn out to be such a harmless substance. The fact of the matter is the scientific evidence is that the increasing levels or concentrations of pollutants in the atmosphere, carbon pollution, greenhouse gases, are contributing to climate change. Governments have to attend to that advice, and that is exactly what we are doing.
OK, just finally in South Australia, Premier Mike Rann is under pressure to resign after 9 years. Is that fair enough?
Well, Mike Rann's a friend of mine. He's been a tremendous Labor leader. I think he's been the Labor leader for 17 years in South Australia and Premier for 9 years. And, you know, that's a matter for the South Australian Labor Party, of course, at the end of the day. But Mike Rann, of many Labor leaders, certainly deserves to be treated with a great degree of respect and dignity.
And if he was to go, it'd be another victory for opinion polls, wouldn't it? That seems to be the case against him, that the polls say he should go.
Oh, well, I mean, there's so many opinion polls out now. Every 2 or 3 days there seems to be another one. I don't know that would... I've got no idea what's driving that commentary in South Australia, but I do know that Mike Rann has got a fantastic record and deserves to be treated with a great degree of respect and dignity.
Greg Combet, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks a lot, Barry. Bye-bye.